And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Noam Chomsky has been denied entry into the West Bank by Israel. The world-renowned linguist and political thinker was scheduled to deliver a lecture at Birzeit University near Ramallah and was scheduled to meet with Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad. On Sunday afternoon, he was stopped by Israeli border guards at the Allenby Bridge border crossing from Jordan. After 3 hours of questioning, Chomsky's passport was stamped denied entry. His daughter, Professor Aviva Chomsky, she teaches at Salem State College, was also denied entry. No reason was initially given for the decision. But the Interior Ministry later told Israeli newspaper Haaretz that officials were now trying to get clearance from the Israel Defense Forces. Interior Ministry spokeswoman Sabine Haddad told Haaretz, quote, "We are trying to contact the military to clear things up, and if they have no objection, we see no reason why he should not be allowed in." Professor Noam Chomsky joins us now from Amman, Jordan. He's the internationally celebrated professor of linguistics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he has taught for over half a century. He's author of over 100 books on linguistics, mass media, American imperialism, and U.S. foreign policy. His latest is called Hopes and Prospects. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, Noam Chomsky. It's good to have you with us. Can you explain exactly what happened on Sunday?
It's very straightforward. The report that you just read from the ministry is inaccurate. I have spoken. The basic facts are as you described them. My daughter and I, along with two old friends, were going to Ramallah from Amman, and were stopped at the border, waited several hours of interrogation, and finally my daughter and I were denied entry. The reasons are quite straightforward. I've spoken at Birzeit University before, but in every prior occasion it was a side trip when I was visiting Israel and giving talks at Israeli universities. This time differs in one respect. I had an invitation from Birzeit, and I accepted it gladly, as in many other cases, and I had no intention of going on to speak in Israel as well this time. That's the only difference. So essentially what Israel is saying is that they insist on the right to determine who is allowed to just visit a Palestinian university at their invitation in New York.
Can you talk about the questions that they asked you? How long did they question you for, and how long were you held at the border?
The border, I guess, was about 5 hours or so, and the questioning, which was intermittent, was maybe 2 hours. The officer at the immigration post was essentially relaying the questions from the Ministry of Information. He was in telephone or computer contact with them.
Noam, say again, who was he in contact with, the border guard?
The Ministry of Information. Ministry of Interior, sorry. Ministry of Interior.
And what was he going back and forth with the Ministry of Interior about?
Well, there were two questions which kept repeating in various forms. One was that they don't like the kinds of things I say about Israel. Okay, as was quoted on Al Jazeera, that puts them in the category of just about everyone else in the world, every other country. Furthermore, it can't possibly have been the reason, since I've been invited by universities in Israel to give talks specifically about Israel, very critical ones. And the talks I was invited for here were primarily about the United States, U.S. foreign and domestic policies. The other question, which is the critical one, and the one difference between this and other occasions, is that I was simply coming to visit Birzeit University and was not at the same time giving talks at Israeli universities with the visit to Birzeit on the side, as had been the case previously, and they didn't like that.
And why didn't they like that?
They didn't like that because I'm speculating, but I think the reason's clear. They don't like the idea that a Palestinian university can be independent and pursue its own policies the same way that any other university in the world does. I mean, it's almost unheard of outside of totalitarian states for a government to prevent someone from responding to an invitation at a university to give a talk.
At the risk of sounding like a border guard, Noam Chomsky, what were you planning to talk about at Birzeit University?
The topics were announced. One was called America in the World. It was about U.S. foreign policy, including Middle East policies, as a special case. The other was America at Home, and it was going to be a discussion of developments inside the United States, particularly in the last 50 years.
And in the first case, what was the speech? Could you elaborate on what you intended to say?
I was going to discuss, and will, in fact, by video conference, discuss some persistent themes in U.S. International relations since the founding of the Republic, but primarily in the past, since the Second World War, when the U.S. became a major player on the world scene, and discuss how policies have developed through the Cold War period and since the Cold War period up to the present, including, of course, policies with regard to the crucial Middle East region ever since it was recognized that oil was going to be a primary resource during World War I, but essentially after World War II, when the United States displaced Britain as the major actor in world affairs.
What is your assessment right now of the situation with Israel and Palestine, and were you going to meet with the Palestinian Prime Minister?
I did. I was going to meet with the Prime Minister. Unfortunately, I couldn't, but his office called me here in Amman this morning, and we had a long discussion. He is pursuing policies which, in my view, are quite sensible, policies of essentially developing facts on the ground. It's almost, I think it's probably a conscious imitation of the early Zionist policies, establishing facts on the ground and hoping that the political forms that follow will be determined by them. And the policies sound to me like sensible and sound ones. The question, of course, is whether the extent to which Israel and the United States, which is a determining factor, the extent to which they'll permit them to be implemented. But if implemented, and if, of course, Israel and the United States would terminate their systematic effort to separate Gaza from the West Bank, which is quite illegal, if that continues, yes, it could turn into a viable Palestinian state.
Noam, you said that what I had said at the beginning was not actually accurate. No reason was initially given for the decision to bar you, but the Interior Ministry later told the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that officials are now trying to get clearance from the Israeli Defense Forces. An Interior Ministry spokeswoman said, "We're trying to contact the military to clear things up, and if they have no objection, we see no reason why he should not be allowed in." What isn't true about that?
I have spoken in Birzeit a number of times. No one ever asked for clearance from the Israeli military. But the one difference in this case is that on those occasions, I was visiting Israel and giving talks at Israeli universities and meetings and so on, and went to Birzeit on a side trip. And in this case, I was going to Birzeit and not speaking at Israeli universities. And in fact, the interrogator, reading questions that were coming from the ministry, repeatedly asked, well, why aren't you also going to give talks in Israel? That's the one difference. And it has nothing to do with the IDF.
How do you know it has nothing to do with the military?
Because it was in either case, I was going to talk in the West Bank. Mm-hmm. That part was the same. The one part that was different in this case is that I was talking in the West Bank and not in Israel. And that has nothing